If Hamas doesn't represent the people, and they're so drastically outnumbered by just the Palestinians that just want to live their lives, don't support Hamas at all, why haven't those people gotten rid of, ushered Hamas out of there, destroyed them, made sure that they don't exist at all, considering the fact that their area of land, the Gaza Strip, is being pummeled and destroyed because of the mass murder that took place? Why haven't they got rid of these bad eggs that they consider them to be within themselves? Hey everybody, I hope as always you've had a great week. I hope you've had a better week than the week that I've had, but I'm still going to give you an update on everything that's happened in Washington, D.C. So let's begin with probably some things that you've heard a lot about throughout the week if you've turned on any news channels. There's the speaker's race, there's Israel, there's what's going on with those things, and there was actually a little legislation that got passed this week, and I'll talk about that as well. So let's start with the speaker's race, what's gone on. There's a couple of peripheral things that have happened there. Number one, you had Jim Jordan, somebody that I supported 3 or 4 times on the floor of the House. However many times he came to the floor is how many times I voted for him to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. Great candidate. In my opinion, any of the 20 people or so that didn't want him to be Speaker, they didn't really seem to have big policy problems, didn't think that he could be a good leader. There were some rifts, some divides that lasted from before he was ever a candidate for Speaker, maybe dating back to January of this year, right up until this moment, that was keeping them from supporting him. I don't think that it was right, but it is what it is. It's what took place. And ultimately, Jim Jordan pulled his name from being considered for Speaker of the House. So what happens now? Throughout this weekend, you have individuals that will put themselves forward to be considered for Speaker of the House of Representatives. You might have 1 or 2, you might have 4, 5, 6 people that put themselves forward for that. All of these people that want to be Speaker, they're going around calling everybody else saying, listen, I want to be Speaker. Can I secure your support for Speaker when we have a candidate forum next week, Monday at about 6 p.m.? Can I secure your support, your vote to become the next Speaker of the House? That's a behind closed doors vote for the Republican conference to choose their person. Then that person will decide that wins. That person that wins will decide that they go when and where they go to the floor of the House to have that considered by the whole of Congress as a vote. I want everybody to be heard out. If there's 5 or 6 candidates that want to put their names forward, I want them all to have a chance to be heard and speak their ideas and speak what they think should happen in the future, how they would adjust the conference, ideas that they have to make us better. Instead of doing that with people that are listening to them already having decided that they're going to vote for this other person. That to me makes for a skewed system, not a better system, not a good system. These races are largely completed before the votes in front of the public ever take place. And I think that's a really swampy thing. I don't like that that's happening. But again, that's a little bit about what happens a little behind the scenes baseball, or inside baseball as people call it. Let's talk about Israel at this point. There's a lot that's gone on with Israel. And to touch off on this, I'm going to start with what the president spoke about just recently. And the president gave a speech from the Oval Office. And he said a couple of things that, in my opinion, were, I guess I would say it like this. I think it was disinformation, in part. I think it was missing information. I think it was inconsequential information, and I think he sprinkled just enough glitter in there so that some of his supporters would say, oh, that's an amazing speech. Look, he said some nice things about Israel, and he said some nice things about American leadership, and said some nice things about Ukraine, but he didn't really dive into what the meat of the issues were, in my opinion. So let's talk about some of those things. Why do I say disinformation? Because I think when you're talking about what he put out there in terms of saying things like, Israel needs to make sure that they watch out that they're not essentially operating in rage, and they need to make sure that they follow the rules of war. Well, let's be very clear here that there has been only one entity that has been operating under the rules of war, and that has been Israel. The other entity, Hamas, terrorists, Palestinian Authority, Palestinians, anybody that was a part of that, they were operating outside of the rules of war and murdering, committing mass murder of Israelis and Americans and other people and taking them hostage. So I thought that was disinformation that he was putting out on that front, missing information. I think he failed to mention Iran, failed to talk about them at all. I think on another front, he failed to really speak about the fact that when you look at the Palestinians. That right now it appears to me everybody's taking for granted, and the president said this, he said, you know, Hamas does not represent the Palestinians. Really? I don't think that that's something that should be taken for granted right now. If Hamas didn't represent the Palestinians, then how did Hamas win a popular election? The last popular election that took place, and I'll grant you it happened a number of years ago, but they won the election. If Hamas doesn't represent the people, and they're so drastically outnumbered by just the Palestinians that just want to live their lives, don't support Hamas at all, why haven't those people gotten rid of, ushered Hamas out of there, destroyed them, made sure that they don't exist at all, considering the fact that their area of land, the Gaza Strip, is being pummeled and destroyed because of the mass murder that took place? Why haven't they got rid of these bad eggs that they consider them to be within themselves? Because they're not the minority in there. Their education system supports Hamas, calls Hamas fighters martyrs. That's not the actions of a minority of the group of people in that country. And so I think it's disinformation and it's missing information to go out there and say that we should just assume that the Palestinians are these righteous people that don't support Hamas at all. They're just the small, itty-bitty minority. And I say that especially in the face of what you're seeing across the country in terms of college campuses. People draping themselves in Palestinian flags to support the actions of these terrorists that brutally murdered Americans, brutally murdered Israelis, brutally murdered people simply for being Jewish, and have taken our people hostage and continue to hold our people hostage. That's what we see. People supporting the terrorists, supporters or sympathizers of them. That's what I see out of the vast majority of Palestinians, and I think it's incumbent upon them to prove that idea wrong. Otherwise, we're operating under the same kind of misguided assumption that so much of the media did when they took the word of a terrorist organization that it was Israel that bombed the hospital, when all indicators show that it was actually Hamas's own missile that hit that hospital. But that's what happens when you take things for granted. Switching gears, we did pass some legislation out of committees this week. And my committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, one of my committees, the Foreign Affairs Committee, legislation specifically related to Israel, terrorism, our support for Israel, our stand against terrorism. One of those pieces of legislation, we'll call it a Hamas sanctions bill. I wrote this bill years ago. We passed it out of committee numerous times in numerous years. However, it hadn't been taken up by the Senate. It hadn't been sent to the president's desk. It passed out of committee again this week. And to be very frank about this is a piece of legislation that sanctions Hamas, anybody that supports Hamas from any state, any individual, any government, any nonprofit organization, non-governmental organization that supports Hamas with materials, with technology, with infrastructure, with goods, with anything. It sanctions them in about half a dozen different ways. And if this had been in place, I think we could safely say that the tools that Hamas had at their disposal, I'm not going to pretend that they wouldn't have all of them, but they wouldn't have had some of them. And that's what that legislation was about. Sanctioning those that support Hamas, whether it's Iran, whether it's Syria, whether it's some other country or some other entity, making sure that that is locked down, cannot happen, and those terrorists don't get the goods that they want to commit their brutal anti-Semitic acts of terrorism that makes me call them essentially Arab Nazis. So that piece of legislation moved out of committee along with some other pieces of legislation that we had been working on, some of them related to the education that I already spoke about that goes on in Palestinian schools. They literally use math problems, geography problems, writing lessons, things like that, to support jihadist ideologies, to support their ideas that Hamas is a good group that's doing righteous work that they should be praised for. We passed out a number of pieces of legislation bipartisanly to show our support for Israel. So very proud of that work that we got done. Now we need to get through that next speaker's race to get those bills through the floor of the House of Representatives, get support taken care of for the things that need to be supported, get rid of things that don't need to be supported. So in that, I hope I gave you all a good idea of things that are taking place on Capitol Hill this week, and to say this, as always, It is an honor to represent each and every one of you, and I look forward to, as always, seeing you all around town when I get home. In that, you all take care. Hey everyone, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, please click like and subscribe. I will be back on YouTube with more exclusive content, so stay tuned.